To the residents of Iron Ridge, Montana, it looked less like a construction site and more like a mass grave. For 6 months, 72-year-old Henry Merrow ignored the whispers and the finger-pointing as he buried his life savings into a dark, damp hole in the side of a hill. While his neighbors built million-dollar aluminum palaces above ground, Henry was preparing for a monster that only he could hear coming. When the storm of the century finally screamed across the plains, turning those expensive stables into freezing coffins, the town realized too late that Henry wasn't digging a tomb. He was building an ark. If you drove past the northern boundary of Iron Ridge in late spring of 1996, you would have seen a spectacle that made the locals question whether old Henry had finally cracked. His face looked like cured leather, every line carved by wind and sun over 7 decades of ranch work. He was destroying the prettiest hill on his property, the one where Martha used to sit with her morning coffee and watch the sunrise paint the Rockies gold. Henry wasn't just digging a foundation. He was gouging a wound into the earth itself. The backhoe operator was Mitch Kowalski, a man who would dig a hole to China if you paid him in cash and didn't ask questions. Together they were moving tons of soil, exposing raw darkness that hadn't seen daylight since the glaciers retreated. The excavation grew deeper each day, a gash 40 feet wide and 20 feet deep eating into the hillside like a hungry mouth. Brock Holloway pulled up in his brand-new Ford F-150 on a Tuesday morning window, down toothpick, working between his teeth. Holloway was everything Henry wasn't: young, wealthy, obsessed with dragging the local equine industry into the 21st century. 3 miles down the road, his massive, gleaming aluminum barn stood like a monument to modern agriculture, equipped with automated feeders and heating units that cost more than Henry's house. The words came out loud enough to carry over the diesel roar. "You hitting oil, Henry." Henry leaned on his shovel, wiping sweat from his brow with a grease-stained rag. He didn't look at Holloway. His eyes stayed fixed on the massive excavation. "Building a shelter, Brock. Same as you." Holloway laughed a sharp bark that said he'd heard the joke before. The engine revved once, twice. "That ain't a shelter. That's a grave. You finally digging one big enough for that ego of yours." The man in the passenger seat chuckled on cue. It was the prevailing opinion in town. Henry Merrow had lost his mind. Ever since Martha passed 3 years prior, he'd become withdrawn obsessive. He spent late nights poring over old pioneer journals and strange architectural blueprints from the 1800s. He ranted about thermal mass and ground coupling to anyone unfortunate enough to sit next to him at the Rusty Spur diner. The waitresses had learned to seat him at the corner booth where he couldn't trap other customers in conversation about dirt temperatures and passive ventilation systems. But the laughter turned to genuine concern when Henry walked into the First National Bank and requested a second mortgage. Sarah Jenkins, the loan officer, was a kind woman who had known Martha well. They'd served together on the church committee. She stamped forms with steady hands, but this time her fingers trembled. The office was hushed carpeted, designed to make difficult financial conversations feel less brutal. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Sarah's nameplate caught the light as she slid the papers across her desk. "Mr. Merrow, I have to advise against this." Her voice carried genuine worry, not the rehearsed concern of someone following a script. "You're putting the ranch up as collateral for dirt work. If you default Henry, you lose the homestead. You lose everything Martha loved." Henry's hands, calloused and scarred from a lifetime of ranch work, rested flat on the desk. His wedding ring, worn thin, caught the light. "Martha loved living horses, Sarah. And if the winter comes like I think it's coming, those pretty metal boxes diversed everyone's building won't be worth the tin they're stamped from." The pen scraped across paper. Sarah's signature looked shaky, uncertain. She thought she was signing his eviction notice, co-signing the final chapter of a grief-stricken man's descent into madness. As Henry walked out into the spring sunshine, Sarah watched through the window and wondered how long before the bank would have to foreclose before she'd have to auction off the Merrow homestead to strangers who wouldn't know that Martha planted the rose bushes by the front porch or that Henry had rebuilt the barn twice after lightning strikes. By July, the structure began to take shape, though calling it a structure felt generous. Henry had purchased 3 massive shipping containers from a freight company in Billings. Each one was 40 feet long, 8 feet wide rusted steel that had crossed oceans carrying cargo nobody in Montana cared about. A flatbed semi delivered them one scorching afternoon, the driver shaking his head as Henry directed him to lower them into the excavated hillside. The containers weren't placed side by side. Henry had Mitch dig deeper, creating a U-shaped trench. The containers were positioned to form three sides of a rectangle welded together at the corners, with seams thick as a man's wrist. The interior created a continuous space, a tunnel of corrugated metal buried in Montana earth. But Henry didn't stop there. He called in a concrete crew from Helena, paying them double to work through a weekend. They poured reinforced concrete around the containers, encasing the steel in a shell 18 inches thick. Rebar jutted from the wet concrete like broken bones. The crew boss, a man named Rodriguez, who'd built bunkers for preppers before, nodded with professional respect as he watched the forms being set. "This'll hold," he said, running calculations in his head about load-bearing capacity and frost heave. "You planning for the end times?" Henry didn't answer directly. He just pointed to the plans spread across the hood of his truck, blueprints, covered in his own handwriting, calculations done by lamplight at his kitchen table. When the concrete cure, the strangest part began. Henry had them bury it all again. 3 feet of soil went back on top of the concrete shell. Excavators pushed dirt over the structure, covering it completely until only the entrance remained visible. Reinforced steel doors jutting from the hillside like a bank vault built into the earth itself. On top of the buried structure, Henry replanted grass. Within weeks, you couldn't tell anything was there, except for the doors and a series of white PVC pipes poking through the ground like periscopes, each one capped with mesh to keep out debris. The town gossip mill went into overdrive. At the post office, old man Peterson leaned on the counter and shared his theory in a stage whisper everyone could hear. "He's building a bunker, thinks the Russians are coming back." Outside the gas station, a teenager pumping premium into his Camaro offered a different explanation to his friends. "I heard he's running a meth lab. My cousin said those pipes are for ventilation so he doesn't blow himself up." But the truth was far more practical and far more desperate. Henry was building an earth-sheltered stable, a concept so old it predated most of the buildings in Iron Ridge. He knew something the town had forgotten, something his grandfather had taught him during the brutal winter of 1949, 6 feet underground. The earth maintains a constant temperature of about 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of whether it's scorching hot or freezing cold at the surface. The earth is the world's largest thermal battery, storing summer heat and winter cold in perfect equilibrium. Henry wasn't building a heater, he was building a thermos. The ventilation pipes, those alien periscopes, were his own design based on something he'd read about termite mounds in Africa. Termites, despite being smaller than a grain of rice, built structures that maintain perfect temperature through passive airflow. Cold air enters through low vents, warming as it passes through the structure. Warm air rises and exits through high vents. No fans, no electricity, just physics and the gentle pressure differential created by temperature gradients. Henry drilled the intake pipes down to the level of the barn floor, then buried them in trenches running 50 feet away from the structure. Air entering those pipes would travel through earth tubes warming to 50 degrees before ever reaching the horses. The exhaust pipes ran straight up through the 3 feet of soil, allowing warm air heavy with moisture from the horse's breath to escape into the Montana sky. The interior of the underground barn was strange. The curved walls of the shipping containers created an industrial cave, claustrophobic in some sections, surprisingly spacious in others where the U-bend opened up. Henry installed rough timber stalls. Nothing fancy, just solid lodgepole pine he cut himself from his back 40 acres. He built feed bins from salvaged lumber and hung water buckets on chains. In 3 spots, he cut rough skylights through the soil above, covering them with thick plexiglass that let in diffuse daylight enough to see by, not enough to heat the space. The floor was simple dirt, graded level, and packed hard. Henry knew that concrete would conduct cold straight into the horse's hooves. Dirt insulated, dirt absorbed moisture. Dirt was what horses had stood on for 50 million years before humans invented concrete. By September, the money ran out. Henry was eating beans on toast for dinner every night, breakfast too. He'd sold his good tractor, the John Deere he'd bought new in '89, to pay for the final welding on the doors. The doors themselves were masterpieces of paranoid engineering, quarter-inch steel plate with internal bracing hung on hinges designed for walk-in freezers sealed with gaskets that would keep out wind, water, and the cold vacuum of space if necessary. A locking wheel on the inside could seal them tight enough to create positive pressure. Henry looked gaunt. His shirts hung loose on a frame that had always been lean, but now bordered on skeletal. The skin around his eyes had gone dark bruised-looking from too many nights spent working by lamplight, checking calculations, triple verifying that his ventilation math would actually work. One afternoon in late September, Brock Holloway pulled up to the fence line again. This time he wasn't laughing. He looked at the strange grassy mound at the heavy steel doors at Henry, who was tightening a hinge with a wrench, and something in his expression had shifted from mockery to something almost like pity. He leaned over the fence, chewing on a toothpick. The words came out casual, rehearsed, like he'd practiced this offer in the mirror. "You know, Henry, I'm looking to expand. I could take this land off your hands. Bulldoze that cave, put up some nice grazing paddocks. I'll pay you fair market value. You can retire to a condo in Florida. Warm weather, no more Montana winters." Henry stopped working. He set down the wrench with deliberate care, each movement precise. He walked slowly to the fence, boots crunching on gravel. When he looked at Holloway, his eyes were clear-focused, not the gaze of a broken man, but of someone who saw further than the next quarterly profit statement. "You got that prize stallion of yours, that Midnight King." Holloway's chest swelled with pride. He couldn't help himself. "Yeah, best bloodline in the state. Maybe the whole Northwest. You keep him in that aluminum barn. Climate-controlled. State-of-the-art." Holloway nodded, waiting for the compliment he assumed was coming. Henry's voice stayed level, factual, like he was explaining why water froze at 32 degrees. "Aluminum gets cold, Brock. Metal's a conductor. And when the power goes out, it's just a freezer coffin." Holloway scoffed, pushing off the fence with enough force to make it rattle. His face flushed red. "You're a bitter old man, Henry. Don't say I didn't offer to save you." Henry turned back to his work, the wrench already back in his hand. "I don't need saving, but you might." The words hung in the air as Holloway's truck sprayed gravel, fishtailing slightly as he accelerated away. October drifted into November with an eerie, unsettling mildness. Temperatures stayed in the 50s during the day, dropping only to the 40s at night. The older folks in Iron Ridge, the ones who remembered the blizzard of '49, didn't like it. They sat on their porches in lawn chairs they should have stored weeks ago, sniffing the air like hounds catching a scent they couldn't quite identify. They noted how the birds seemed to be leaving early whole flocks of geese passing overhead in formations so dense they darkened the sky. The squirrels were gathering nuts with frantic, manic energy, their cheeks bulging as they made trip after trip to their hidden stores. Henry felt it in his knees, a deep, throbbing ache that was more reliable than any barometer. The joint pains started in early October and grew worse with each passing week. On clear mornings when the weather forecast called for sunshine, his knees would swell and throb, predicting storms that wouldn't arrive for another 2 days. Martha used to tease him about being her personal weather station. Now the empty space where she'd stood in the kitchen felt like a physical presence, her absence louder than any conversation. He spent his days moving his herd down from the summer pastures. He had 12 quarter horses, sturdy working stock he'd bred for 30 years. Among them was Bessie, a chestnut mare heavily pregnant with what would likely be her last foal, her belly hung low and round udder already bagging up with colostrum. There was Rusty, an old gelding, 23 years young, more pet than workhorse now, who followed Henry like a loyal dog. The others had names that reflected their personalities or their quirks. Smokey for his gray coat, Dancer for her nervous energy, Buck for obvious reasons. One by one, Henry led them from the upper pastures down toward what the town had christened the cave. The horses were skeptical at first. Animals know when something's different when their routine changes. They balked at the dark entrance nostrils, flaring ears, swiveling forward to catch echoes from inside the earth. But Henry was patient. He led Rusty in first, knowing the others would follow their herd leader. Rusty's hooves echoed on the packed dirt floor, a hollow sound that made him sidestep nervously. But Henry kept walking, his hand on the old gelding's shoulder, his voice low and steady, and eventually Rusty relaxed. The other horses followed, drawn by herd instinct and trust in their human. The interior of the underground barn was strange. It smelled of damp earth and fresh hay, the sweet, dusty scent of timothy grass Henry had stored in bales along one wall. It was darker than a normal barn, lit only by the diffuse daylight filtering through the skylights. But the moment you stepped inside, the wind ceased to exist. The constant Montana wind that had been battering the surface, bending grass, and rattling fence posts simply stopped. The silence was absolute. It felt safe in a primal way, like crawling into a den. But the town of Iron Ridge was distracted by other concerns. The annual Harvest Festival was coming up in mid-November, and the weather forecast was calling for mild flurries, nothing serious. The weatherman on Channel 4, a young guy named Greg, with perfect teeth and a spray tan, joked on air about how winter was taking a vacation this year, how maybe climate change meant Montana would become the new Florida. Henry wasn't laughing. He was at the hardware store buying every propane canister and battery Mitch Kowalski had in stock. He loaded them into his truck bed along with boxes of emergency candles, matches in waterproof containers, and medical supplies that made Mitch raise an eyebrow. "You expecting war, Henry?" Mitch asked as he rang up the total. The register beeped with each scanned item, the number climbing higher. Mitch was one of the few who didn't openly mock Henry, mostly because Henry paid his bills on time and in cash. In a small town, that kind of reliability earned a measure of respect that transcended eccentricity. Henry pointed out the store window with one gnarled finger. "Look at the horizon, Mitch." Mitch squinted through the dusty glass. The northwestern sky was visible between the hardware store and the grain elevator. "Just some clouds." "Not the clouds, the color." Mitch looked harder. The sky to the northwest wasn't the normal gray of approaching weather. It was a sickly, bruised yellow tinged with a faint toxic green, like the flesh around an infected wound. The color seemed to pulse to shift as he watched, as if the sky itself was fevered and sick. "Hail, maybe." Henry shook his head, grabbing his bags. His voice dropped low, almost reverent. "That's the bottom dropping out." 2 days later, on November 14th, the temperature in Iron Ridge was 45 degrees at noon. Mild enough that people were walking around in light jackets, teenagers in just hoodies. The sun was out, weak but present. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the temperature was 15 degrees. The drop was so sudden, so violent, that windshields across town cracked from the thermal shock. Glass spiderwebbed in car after car, the sound of breaking glass echoing down Main Street like gunshots. Henry was in his kitchen when the phone rang. The landline, a rotary model from the 70s that Martha had refused to replace because she liked the weight of it, the solid clunk of the dial returning to position. The call was from his daughter Caroline, phoning from Seattle, where she worked as a graphic designer, living a life about as far from ranching as you could get while staying in the same country. Her voice came through tinny, compressed by distance and old wiring. "Dad, are you okay? The news is saying there's a pressure system collapsing over the Rockies. They're calling it unprecedented." Henry stood by the kitchen window, watching the thermometer on his porch. It was one of those old-fashioned alcohol thermometers, red liquid in a glass tube mounted on the wall where Martha could see it from the sink. The red column was dropping, visibly ticking down like a countdown. 12 degrees, 10 degrees, 8. "I'm fine, Carrie. I'm moving the horses in now, into the hole." A pause on the line. Even she thought he'd lost it, his own daughter. The silence stretched long enough that Henry could hear office sounds in the background, phones ringing a printer, whirring normal life happening 2 states away in a city where the biggest weather concern was whether you needed an umbrella. "Dad, maybe you should bring them to Holloway's. He offered space for emergency boarding last month. It's heated. It's safe." The word "no" came out sharper than he intended, cracking through the phone line. "My horses stay with me." Caroline's voice took on that careful tone the one adult children use when they're worried about their aging parents, when they're measuring the distance between independence and intervention. "You're so stubborn. You're going to freeze to death out there trying to prove a point." Henry's throat tightened. He forced the words out, soft, gentle. "I love you, Carrie. I have to go." He hung up before she could argue, before he could hear the worry in her voice turn to tears. He stood in the kitchen Martha had designed, looking at the empty spaces where she used to move, and wondered if this was how it ended, if he was indeed just a crazy old man about to die, proving nothing to nobody. Then he felt it through the floorboards, a vibration so low, it was more sensation than sound, like standing near railroad tracks when a freight train was still miles away, but coming fast. The house seemed to hum, the windows rattling faintly in their frames. Henry went outside. The air was dry and brittle. Each breath scraped his throat like inhaling broken glass. The wind hadn't hit yet, and that was the scariest part. The air was perfectly still, frozen in place like the world had stopped breathing. But the temperature was now 2 degrees below zero. The flash freeze had begun, the temperature dropping 60 degrees in 4 hours, a meteorological impossibility that was happening anyway. He moved quickly, his body remembering ranch work despite 7 decades of wear. He led the horses out of the upper pasture where they'd been grazing on the last of the autumn grass. They came willingly at first, following him down the slope toward the strange grass-covered mound that hid their new shelter. But as they got closer, as they saw the dark entrance of the steel doors standing open like a mouth, their instincts rebelled. Animals know when something's wrong. They feel it in ways humans have forgotten. The horses started to balk, their eyes showing white all around the edges. Bessie, heavy with her unborn foal, planted her hooves and refused to move. Dancer spun in circles, whinnying sharp and frightened. Henry didn't have time for patience. He grabbed a bucket of sweet feed, the molasses-coated grain they loved, and rattled it hard. The sound cut through their panic. One by one, they followed the bucket into the dark tunnel, their hooves echoing on packed earth. "Easy, Rusty. Easy, girl. It's warm inside. Come on." He got 11 of them in, 11 horses standing in the dim underground space, their breath already starting to warm the air, their body heat beginning the process of turning the structure into a living furnace. The 12th was Jumper, a young colt barely 2 years old, still full of the nervous energy that came with youth. As Henry turned to lead him in, the colt's head jerked up. His ears swiveled toward the northwest, catching something Henry couldn't hear yet. Then Jumper bolted, the word ripped from Henry's throat, raw and desperate. "Jumper, no!" The colt ran toward the tree line, his tail flagged high, his hooves throwing up clods of frozen earth. Henry grabbed a halter from the hook by the door and ran after him, his 72-year-old legs pumping, his lungs burning as the cold air seared his airways. Each breath felt like swallowing razor blades. He reached the edge of the woods just as the sound hit him. It started low, a rumble that rose from the earth itself, then climbed into a grinding roar that vibrated in his teeth and made his skull ache. Henry looked up, looked toward the horizon, and saw what the horses had already sensed. The mountains were gone. The familiar peaks that had dominated the northwestern skyline his entire life, the Rockies that Martha used to paint in watercolors, simply weren't there anymore. In their place was a wall of white, thousands of feet high, a solid mass racing across the plains like a tsunami made of ice. It wasn't snow falling from clouds. It was a horizontal avalanche driven by winds that had to be hurricane force, moving faster than any storm system had a right to move. Henry didn't think. He tackled Jumper, his shoulder hitting the colt's flank hard enough to knock the animal sideways. His fingers found the halter, clipped the lead rope on with muscle memory that didn't require conscious thought. He didn't try to lead the horse. He dragged him, wrapping the rope around his own waist for leverage. Move, move or die. They scrambled back toward the hill. The roar became deafening, drowning out thought. The first gust hit them like a physical blow, wind strong enough to knock Henry sideways. He caught himself on Jumper's shoulder, using the horse as a shield. It wasn't snow falling around them. It was ice pellets, frozen buckshot driven at rifle velocity. Something hit Henry's cheek, and he felt warmth, realized it was blood. Realized the wind was literally cutting his skin. He reached the heavy steel doors just as the world turned white. Visibility dropped from 50 yards to 0 in the space between heartbeats. He shoved the colt inside using his full weight, and the animal stumbled into the darkness beyond. Henry threw himself against the door, grabbing the handle with both hands. The wind caught the door, tried to rip it from his grip, tried to tear it off the hinges. The metal vibrated under his palms like a living thing fighting to escape. He pulled with everything he had left, every ounce of strength from 7 decades of ranch work, from hauling hay bales and wrestling stubborn cattle and rebuilding fence lines in summer heat. His boots slipped in the frozen dirt. His shoulder screamed as something tore tendon or muscle, he couldn't tell and didn't care. The door moved an inch, then 6 inches, then a foot. The wind howled in protest, a sound so loud and so alien it didn't seem like weather anymore. It sounded like rage, like the earth itself was screaming. Henry's vision started to tunnel, black spots dancing at the edges. He couldn't breathe. The wind was stealing the air from his lungs faster than he could inhale. With a scream that came from somewhere deeper than his lungs, somewhere primal and desperate, Henry slammed the lever down. The locking mechanism engaged with a heavy clunk he felt more than heard. He spun the wheel, his hands cramping the metal cold enough to burn through his gloves. One rotation, two, three. The gaskets compressed, the seal engaged, and the roar instantly muffled to a dull, distant hum. He was inside. The door was closed. The world was locked out. Henry collapsed against the steel, sliding down until he hit the dirt floor. His lungs heaved, trying to remember how to process oxygen. His hands shook so violently he had to grip his own wrists to make them stop. The cut on his cheek dripped blood onto his collar, warm against skin that felt frozen all the way through. It was pitch black. The skylights above were already covered with snow, their faint light snuffed out. Henry fumbled for his lantern, the one he'd hung on a hook just inside the door for exactly this scenario. His fingers found the matches in his pocket. He dropped the matches twice before he could strike one, the tiny flame sputtering to life and casting wild, dancing shadows against the curved concrete walls. When the lantern finally caught filling the space with warm, amber light, Henry looked around. The thermometer on the wall read 52 degrees. The air was calm, still almost dead. The horses were huddled together at the far end of the U-bend, steam rising from their coats like smoke. Their eyes reflected the lantern light wide and frightened but alive. All 12 of them. Jumper stood among them, sides heaving but safe. Outside, separated from them by 3 feet of soil-reinforced concrete and quarter-inch steel, the blizzard of 1996 was tearing Montana apart. But down here, 10 feet below the chaos, Henry Merrow sat on a hay bale and listened to his horses breathe. The clock on the wall ticked. The temperature held steady. His arc had sealed just in time. He looked up at the ceiling, at the bare metal and concrete that separated him from the storm, and thought about Martha. About the morning she'd sat on this hill drinking coffee, watching the sunrise. About the way she'd believed in him, even when he was wrong, even when his plans failed. About how she would have looked at this underground cave and smiled, would have understood why he'd done it. The wind above screamed and howled, but Henry couldn't hear Martha's voice telling him he was right. All he heard was his own ragged breathing and the steady living warmth of 12 horses who would survive because one stubborn old man refused to build up when the only answer was to dig down. Time loses meaning underground. There is no sunrise to mark morning, no sunset to signal rest. There is only the rhythm of breathing, the shift of hooves on packed earth, and the steady, reassuring hum of ventilation pipes drawing fresh air through the frozen world above. Henry sat against the steel door for what might have been minutes or might have been an hour, his chest still heaving, his hands still shaking from the adrenaline crash. The lantern light flickered across the curved walls, making the shadows dance like ghosts. The horses had settled somewhat, their panic fading, as they realized this strange dark place was at least warm, at least safe from whatever monster was screaming outside. He forced himself to stand, his joints protesting every movement. The cut on his cheek had stopped bleeding, but throbbed with each heartbeat. He needed to check the animals, verify none had injured themselves in the panic of being driven underground. He moved through the narrow space between the stalls, running his hands along flanks and legs, checking for swelling or heat that might indicate a pulled muscle or a stone bruise. Bessie shifted as he approached, her pregnant belly swaying. She turned her head to look at him, and something in her expression made Henry pause. Her eyes were unfocused, distant. Her breathing came in short, rhythmic bursts that didn't match the exertion of the walk down from the pasture. He placed his hand on her flank. The muscle contracted hard beneath his palm, a ripple that moved from her hindquarters forward like a wave. She grunted, a low sound that came from deep in her chest. Labor. Not now, not in the middle of this. Henry checked his watch, the old Timex Martha had given him for their 20th anniversary. It was just past midnight. The storm had hit around 11. Bessie's contractions were coming every few minutes, strong enough to make her shift her weight and grunt. She was still hours away from active labor, but the process had begun, triggered perhaps by stress or perhaps by simple biology that cared nothing for blizzards. He would need help. He would need supplies. He would need luck. The banging started just as he finished his thought. 3 sharp impacts against the steel door, metal on metal, urgent and desperate. The sound cut through the muffled roar of the wind like a gunshot. Henry froze. Every horse in the barn froze with him, ears swiveling toward the entrance. The banging came again, weaker this time, irregular. Someone was out there. Someone was dying out there. His engineering brain screamed warnings. Opening that door would break the pressure seal. The temperature differential between inside and outside was now over 70 degrees. The wind could rip the door from his hands, could depressurize the barn, could suck out all the heat they'd already generated. It could kill them all. But the banging came a third time. Faint, fading. A human being freezing to death 3 inches of steel away. Henry grabbed the coil of hemp rope hanging from its hook. He lashed one end around his waist, securing it with a bowline knot his hands could tie in the dark in his sleep after 50 years of practice. The other end he secured to the structural support pillar where the shipping containers had been welded together. If the wind took him, it wouldn't take him far. He shouted toward the back of the barn, his voice bouncing off the metal walls. Back! Get back! The horses shuffled deeper into the U-bend away from whatever was about to happen. Rusty whinnied a questioning sound. Henry didn't have an answer. His hands found the locking wheel. He turned it slowly, feeling the resistance as the mechanism disengaged. The moment the seal broke, a high-pitched shriek filled the air. The sound of atmosphere being violently sucked through a gap it shouldn't fit through. The temperature in the barn dropped 5 degrees in as many seconds. He didn't shove the door open. He just released the latch and the wind did the rest. The door kicked back with force that rattled his teeth, the metal groaning as it swung wide. He planted his boot against the frame, gripped the handle with both hands, holding it at a 45-degree angle to keep it from slamming into the concrete wall and bending the hinges. The world outside had ceased to exist. There was no hill, no fence, no sky, just white chaos moving at velocities that turned snowflakes into projectiles. The beam from his lantern died 3 feet beyond the threshold, swallowed by the maelstrom. On the small concrete apron he'd poured in front of the entrance, a shape lay crumpled. Not standing, not moving. A pile of snow-crusted fabric that might have been human once. Henry lunged forward, the rope around his waist pulling taut. The cold hit him like a physical entity, stripping warmth from his body so fast he gasped and immediately regretted it as ice crystals formed in his throat. This wasn't weather anymore. This was the kind of cold that existed at altitudes where jets flew, where human beings couldn't survive unprotected for more than minutes. He grabbed the pile. It was heavy, solid, a person. He dug his heels into the concrete, now slick with ice forming faster than physics should allow. He hauled backward, every muscle in his back screaming. The wind fought him, seeming to grip the body, claiming it as tribute. 1 heave. 2. On the third, the body slid over the threshold onto the dirt floor. Henry didn't wait. He threw himself at the door's shoulder, hitting steel. The wind was pushing against it now, trying to hold it open, trying to flood the barn with air so cold it would freeze the horses where they stood. His boots slipped in the dirt. He was 72 years old, and for one terrible moment he thought this was it, thought he'd die frozen in his own doorway, proving nothing except that stubbornness and hypothermia both killed the same. Then he thought of Holloway laughing. Crazy old Henry. That ain't a shelter, that's a grave. Rage flooded his system, hot and chemical. He drove his legs down, locked his knees, and shoved with everything he had left. The door moved an inch. 6 inches. The wind howled protest. Henry roared back, wordless and primal. The door slammed home. He spun the wheel, fingers numb, turning until the mechanism locked with a solid chunk that meant sealed, meant safe, meant alive. The shrieking stopped. Silence rushed back in, thick and ringing. The only sounds were his ragged breathing and the nervous shuffling of horses in the dark. Henry dropped to his knees beside the figure. He rolled them over snow and ice, cascading off frozen fabric. It was a kid, maybe 20 years old, wearing a thin nylon jacket with Holloway Stables embroidered on the chest. His face was a mask of ice. Frost had sealed his eyelashes shut. His skin was the color of old wax gray blue, like meat left too long in a freezer. Recognition hit. Leo, the college kid who worked weekends mucking stalls for Holloway. Marketing major or business. Something useless for ranch work, but he showed up on time and worked hard and never complained about the smell. Good kid. Quiet. Henry slapped his cheek hard. It felt like slapping frozen beef. Leo, son, can you hear me? Nothing, no response. His breathing was shallow, barely visible, a faint flutter in his chest that could stop any second. Henry didn't panic. Panic was for people who lived in aluminum barns. He moved with precision born from having imagined this exact scenario during all those sleepless nights. He ran to the back of the barn where his emergency supplies were stored in a metal footlocker. 3 wool blankets, the heavy, scratchy, army surplus kind that held heat even when wet. A thermos of hot coffee he'd prepared before the storm hit, wrapped in towels to keep it warm. He stripped Leo's frozen outer layers. The nylon jacket was useless stiff as cardboard. The boots came off, revealing toes that were white, not black. Not frostbitten yet. Still time. Henry wrapped the kid in wool, layering it thick, creating a cocoon. Then he dragged him to the warmest spot in the barn, the narrow space between Rusty's stall and the wall. The 1,000-pound animal radiated heat like a furnace, his body temperature naturally sitting at 100 degrees. Better than any electric blanket. He rubbed Leo's arms through the wool, stimulating blood flow, forcing circulation. His voice came out as a command, not a request. "Wake up, son. You don't get to die in my barn. I won't have the paperwork." A low groan escaped Leo's lips. His eyelids fluttered, cracking the ice on his lashes. The eyes underneath were unfocused, confused pupils, different sizes. Mr. Moreau." The voice was a whisper, slurred like he'd had 6 beers, the neurological damage of a brain that had gotten too cold too fast. Henry held the thermos cap to his lips. "Drink." Leo took a sip and choked, coughing violently. Coffee sprayed across the wool blankets. But he coughed, which meant his lungs worked, which meant he might make it. "I was in the truck. Couldn't see. Don't talk, just shiver." Shivering is good. Shivering means you're alive. Henry sat back against the hay bale, watching the boy shake violently as his body temperature began to climb back towards survivable. Above them, separated by 3 feet of soil and reinforced concrete, the blizzard tore at the world. But down here, the thermometer still read 53 degrees, rising slowly as the horse's body heat accumulated. Leo's shivering gradually slowed from violent convulsions to rhythmic tremors. Color crept back into his face, flushed and fevered looking. His eyes gained focus. "How did you find me?" "I didn't. You found me. Beat on the door like you were training to wake the dead." "The vent. I saw the vent pipe. Had a reflector on it. Only light I could see." Henry nodded. Those reflectors had cost him $40 he couldn't afford. Worth every penny now. Leo's expression shifted, memory flooding back. "The power went out at Holloway's around 10. Henry felt his stomach drop. "The generator started for maybe 10 seconds, then died. Smoke coming out. Brock Mr. Holloway, he kept saying he'd get someone to service it next week." The implications lined up like dominoes. Holloway's barn was all aluminum and steel, designed to shed heat in summer. In winter, without heating, it was a refrigerator. The metal would conduct cold straight through. The concrete floor would suck heat from hooves. The automatic water system would freeze pipes, would burst, and 40 horses would be trapped in a metal coffin as the temperature inside matched the 20 below zero outside. "How many horses does he have in there?" Leo's voice dropped to a whisper. 40, including Midnight King. The $1 million stallion, the pride of Montana. The horse Holloway bragged about at every town meeting, every poker game, every chance he got. If the generator was down, if the backup systems had failed, those horses were dying right now, slowly, miserably, freezing in their stalls while their owners scrambled for solutions that didn't exist. Henry looked at the thermometer. 54 degrees. Looked at his 12 horses. Looked at the narrow space in the U-bin that was already cramped, already tight. 40 more horses wouldn't fit. The math didn't work. The physics didn't allow it. But Martha's voice in his head was clear as the day she'd said it 20 years ago, when he'd wanted to sell off a sick calf rather than spend money on a vet. "We save what we can save, Henry. We don't count the cost until after." A crackle of static cut through his thoughts. The ham radio in the corner, the ancient Kenwood unit from his merchant marine days, was picking up something. White noise, mostly the electromagnetic chaos of the storm playing hell with radio waves. But underneath, a human voice. Faint, desperate, local. Henry moved to the radio, turned up the volume. The voice came through clearer, broken by static, but recognizable. "Repeat, this is Brock Holloway. Emergency on County Road 9. Is anyone receiving over?" Henry stared at the microphone. He could leave it. Could let the man who'd mocked him, who tried to buy his land to bulldoze his life's work, face the consequences of his own arrogance. The ant and the grasshopper. The parable his grandfather had taught him about planning ahead. Holloway's voice came again, the bravado gone replaced by something raw. We're losing them. The water lines burst. Barns icing over inside. We can't keep them warm. We have foals, please, anyone. Leo was watching him. The kid's eyes said everything without words. Said that Henry was better than this. Said that horses didn't care about human grudges. Henry picked up the microphone. Pressed the button. His voice came out gravel and steel. Holloway, this is Henry Merrow. Over. The pause on the other end stretched so long, Henry thought he had lost the signal. Then Holloway's voice came back, disbelief and hope mixing into something close to hysteria. Henry, Jesus Christ, Henry. The lines are down, roads are gone. I don't know what to do. Yeah, shut up and listen. The command cut through Holloway's panic like a knife. The radio went silent. You can't save the barn. The barn is dead. You have to save the heat you have left. How it's 10 below in here already. You have the wool blankets. The show ones. Yes, but put them on, double layers, then get all the horses together, all of them. Move them into the center aisle, pack them tight, standing room only. Their body heat is the only furnace you've got left. That's dangerous. If they panic, Henry's voice rose sharp enough to make Leo flinch. They're going to die anyway, Brock. Frozen standing in those fancy stalls. Pack them tight. Close the vents. Seal the doors with duct tape tarps, whatever you have. You need to turn that barn into a submarine. A long silence. Then Holloway's voice came back, smaller, broken. I don't think it's going to be enough. The metal roof is groaning. The snow load is too heavy. I can hear it bending. Henry looked up at his own ceiling. 3 feet of dirt engineered to distribute load to bear weight without transferring stress to the structure below. His roof could hold a tank. Holloway's couldn't hold a Montana winter. Henry, Holloway's voice was barely a whisper now. I was wrong. About everything. I'm sorry. The apology hung in the air. Henry stared at the microphone, at the emergency supplies lined against the wall, at the 12 horses who trusted him. At Leo wrapped in wool, watching with eyes that said heroes didn't keep score. Henry released the button. He looked at the empty space at the far end of his tunnel. It was tight, but not impossible. 40 horses plus his 12. 52 total. The thermal math might work if they were packed shoulder to shoulder, if their combined body heat could warm enough air to circulate through the ventilation system. It was suicide. Going out there meant driving 3 miles in a whiteout at 20 below. With wind chill dropping it to 40 or 50 below, his tractor might not start, might stall halfway. The diesel could gel, the battery could die, and he'd freeze in the cab before anyone found him. But Martha's voice was clear. We save what we can save. He pressed the button. I'm coming to get them. Leo sat up at the blankets falling away. You can't go out there. You said it yourself. It's death. Henry was already moving, pulling his heavy parka from the hook, checking the pockets for the emergency kit he'd prepared. Flares, matches, a knife, a whistle. Things that seemed paranoid 3 months ago and vital now. Can you walk? Leo nodded, though his legs still trembled. I think so. Why? Because we're going to need the tractor, and we're going to need a lot of rope. He turned to grab the coil from the wall, and a sound from behind stopped him cold. A high-pitched whinny of pain. Bessie was down on her side thrashing. Her water had broken, amniotic fluid pooling in the straw. Henry closed his eyes. The universe had timing like a sadistic comedian. Not now, please, not now. But biology didn't care about blizzards or rescue missions or dying horses 3 miles away. Bessie was in active labor, contractions coming hard and fast. The foal was coming whether Henry was ready or not. He looked at Leo, looked at the radio crackling with static and Holloway's desperate breathing on the other end. Looked at Bessie straining her belly, rippling with contractions that meant this foal would be born in the next hour whether anyone helped or not. His voice came out calm, measured, hiding the scream building in his chest. Leo, you ever delivered a foal? The kid's face went white. No, never. I just mucked stalls and fed them. I'm a marketing major. I don't know. Henry grabbed his shoulders, looked him dead in the eye. You're about to learn. Because I have to go get Holloway's horses. Bessie's going to need you. He moved to the stall, knelt in the straw next to the laboring mare. His hands moved automatically, checking her progression. The foal's nose was presenting, front hooves visible. Normal position, everything looked right except for the timing, which was catastrophically wrong. He stood, grabbed Leo, pulled him close so their faces were inches apart. Listen carefully. She's going to push. When you see the shoulders coming through, support the foal's weight. Don't pull unless something's wrong. If it gets stuck, if you can't see both front hooves and the nose together, you push the foal back in and try to reposition. You understand? Leo's voice shook. What if I can't? What if I mess up? Henry grabbed the emergency lantern, the good one with the bright LED, and hung it above the stall. Then you do your best. That's all any of us can do. He turned to leave, but Leo's voice stopped him. Mr. Merrow, you're going out there to save Holloway's horses. The same man who called you crazy, who tried to buy your land to tear this place down. Henry paused at the door, his hand on the locking wheel. Horses don't care about grudges, son. And Martha would haunt me if I let good animals die, just to prove I was right. The machine was a 1978 International Harvester, red paint, faded to rust, cast iron and determination. Henry called it the Mule. It didn't have computerized fuel injection or a heated cab. It had a glow plug, a choke, and a stubborn will that matched its owner. The equipment shed attached to the side of the underground barn offered minimal protection from the storm. The corrugated tin roof vibrated so violently it sounded like machine gun fire. Wind had found every gap in the walls, creating jets of snow that sprayed across the concrete floor. Henry's hands, stiff inside 2 pairs of gloves, fumbled with a can of starting fluid. He sprayed ether into the intake. 1, 2, 3 seconds. Enough to make the initial combustion easier, but not so much it would damage the cylinders. He climbed into the cab. The seat was a block of ice even through his heavy coat. The key turned. The engine groaned, rotating with the sluggish reluctance of metal that wanted to stay dormant in a cold this severe. The starter motor whined. The engine turned over once, twice. Click, dead. Henry's chest tightened. If the battery was too cold, if the starter was frozen, this ended before it began. He pumped the throttle twice, turned the key again. The starter caught, whining higher. The engine turned, coughed, died. Come on, you old girl, don't let me down now. Third try, he pressed the glow plug button, holding it for a full 10 seconds to heat the cylinder head. Turned the key, held his breath. The engine caught with a bang that shook the whole tractor. Black diesel smoke erupted from the stack, momentarily darkening the shed. The engine settled into a loud rhythmic clatter that vibrated through the seat, through his bones, the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. He engaged the PTO for the rear winch, lowered the front blade. He wasn't going to plow the road that was impossible with drifts already 4 feet high in building. He was going to smash through, using the blade as a battering ram and the tractor's 6,000 pounds to punch a tunnel through the white. He drove out of the shed. The transition was instantaneous and total. 1 second he had walls and a roof. The next he was inside a milk bottle surrounded by white so complete it erased the concept of direction. His headlights reflected off the swirling snow, creating a wall of glare that blinded more than it illuminated. He killed the lights. It was counterintuitive but necessary. In a whiteout, lights only created a mirror. He had to navigate by feeling, by the faint difference between the slightly darker gray of the ground and the lighter gray of the air. He opened the cab door, leaning out into the gale. The wind hit him like a fist, stealing his breath. Ice pellets stung his exposed skin, each one a tiny cut. He looked down, searching for the tops of the fence posts that lined his driveway. They were his only navigation markers. Wooden soldiers standing guard in the chaos. Post. Drift. Post. He crawled forward at 2 miles per hour, the tractor bucking and roaring as the massive tires churned through snow that would have swallowed a pickup. The 3-mile journey to Holloway's barn usually took 5 minutes on a clear day. Tonight it was an Arctic expedition. About a mile and disaster struck. The front wheel caught the edge of the road, slipped off the shoulder into the drainage ditch. The tractor lurched violently left, tipping at an angle that sent Henry's heart into his throat. The engine roared as the wheels spun freely, grabbing nothing but air and loose snow. Gravity pulled at him, wanting to drag the whole machine into the ditch, where it would be buried and forgotten until spring. He slammed the differential lock, a lever that forced both rear wheels to turn at the same speed. The tires bit into something solid beneath the snow. Frozen mud, maybe, or gravel. The tractor shuddered, groaning like a living thing in pain. Metal stressed. Bolts creaked. For 3 seconds, Henry thought it was over, thought the mule would roll and pin him, and that would be how they found him, in the spring frozen in the cab of an upside-down tractor. Then the tires caught. The machine clawed its way back onto level ground with the grace of a drunk elephant lurching and swaying. Henry fell back into the seat, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. He wiped his face. His glove came away bloody. The wind had cracked the skin on his other cheek, matching the wound from earlier. He pressed on because stopping meant dying, and dying meant 40 horses would freeze in a metal tomb while a college kid tried to deliver a foal by himself. 40 minutes later, a shape loomed out of the white void. It didn't look like a barn anymore. It looked like the carcass of some massive creature that had died trying to survive. Holloway's state-of-the-art facility was dark, powerless, battered. The sleek aluminum siding was dented by debris the wind had turned into projectiles. A snowdrift had piled against the north wall, reaching nearly to the roofline. But the most terrifying thing wasn't what Henry could see. It was what he could hear. Even over the scream of the wind, even through the tractor's engine noise, he could hear the horses inside. 40 animals in collective panic, screaming and kicking and fighting against the cold that was killing them. He killed the engine, stepped out into hell. The wind knocked him sideways. He caught himself on the tractor wire, used it to pull himself upright. The personnel door was frozen halfway open, ice having wedged it in place. He pushed through, entering the barn. The temperature inside was maybe 5 degrees warmer than outside. Maybe. The humidity was 100%. Every breath the horses took, every drop of sweat on their hides, had condensed on the cold metal ceiling and frozen. The entire roof was covered in icicles, thousands of them, ranging from thin needles to stalactites thick as a man's arm. Every vibration from the wind shook the structure, and ice shards rained down on the terrified animals below, clattering against concrete and horseflesh. Holloway's voice cut through the chaos, raw and desperate. "Henry!" He emerged from the center aisle, flashlight beam cutting wildly. The arrogant millionaire looked like a refugee. His expensive coat was torn. His face was streaked with soot and snot and frozen tears. His eyes had the glazed look of someone past their breaking point. He ran forward, grabbed Henry's shoulders, nearly collapsing. "I can't calm them down. The water pipes burst an hour ago. The floor is ice. 2 of the yearlings slipped. I think they broke their legs." Henry looked past him into the nightmare. Midnight King, the $1 million stallion, was rearing in his stall, eyes rolling white, kicking the metal walls with sounds like gunshots. The acoustics of the metal barn amplified every noise, creating a feedback loop of terror. Horses screamed, ice fell, metal groaned, the animals screamed louder. Henry grabbed Holloway by the collar, shook him hard enough to snap his head back. "Pull yourself together, Brock." Holloway's hand pointed up, shaking. "The roof. Look at the trusses." Henry shined his lantern up. The aluminum trusses that had supported the roof were groaning, bending visibly under the snow load combined with wind pressure. The center beam had developed a bow, curving downward in a way no structural element should ever curve. His voice came out flat, factual. "It's going to collapse." Holloway sobbed, the sound of a man watching his entire world implode. "We have to leave them. We can't get them out. They'll kill us if we try to lead them through this panic." Henry looked at the 40 horses, saw the steam rising from their backs, the only heat source left in this metal coffin, saw the terror that would turn to suffering, suffering to death, slow and cold, and completely preventable. "We're not leaving them, and we're not leading them. We're going to tie them." "What? Get your lead ropes, every chain you have. We tie them head to tail in a single line. I hook the lead horse to the tractor. The mule breaks the path. They just have to follow." Holloway's face twisted. "That's 3 miles in a blizzard. The foals will freeze. They'll panic and strangle themselves." Henry turned back toward the door where the tractor waited. "They might freeze out there, but they will definitely be crushed in here." A loud crack echoed through the barn. A bolt sheared off a truss, pinged against the concrete like a bullet ricochet. A section of ceiling sagged 2 inches lower. Henry's voice cut through Holloway's paralysis. "Get the ropes, now." They worked with the desperate efficiency of men who knew death was timing them. Holloway pulled lead ropes from the tackroom chains from storage every piece of equipment that could connect one horse to another. Henry moved through the panicked herd speaking low and steady, his voice somehow cutting through the chaos. Midnight King went first. The stallion was too valuable to risk at the back where he might bolt. Henry blindfolded him with a cut-up flannel shirt, tying it over his eyes so he couldn't see the storm, couldn't see the white death waiting outside. Horses will follow when they can't see where they're being led, their herd instinct overriding their panic. Behind the king, they tied the strongest horses, the ones who could handle the lead position. Then the brood mares, their heavier bodies useful as windbreaks. The yearlings went in the middle, flanked by older animals who could keep them calm. The foals were sandwiched between their mothers and geldings, too old to spook easily. 40 horses in a chain, head to tail, connected by rope and chain and desperation. The wind outside had somehow gotten worse. When Henry opened the barn doors wide enough to lead the chain through, snow blasted in with enough force to knock a man down. The temperature inside the barn, already fatal, dropped another 5 degrees in seconds. He clipped Midnight King's lead rope to the tractor's drawbar, the reinforced steel meant for pulling plows and hay wagons. The stallion fought the blindfold, trying to rear, but Henry held firm, his voice a continuous stream of calm sounds that meant safety even when nothing was safe. Easy, easy now, we're going home. Just follow. That's all you have to do. Follow. Holloway positioned himself alongside the chain, walking the length of the line, checking each connection. His expensive clothes were ruined, his hands bleeding from rope burns, but he moved with purpose, now the panic burned away by the simple clarity of action. The tractor engine coughed to life. Black smoke. A prayer answered. Henry engaged the lowest gear, the one meant for pulling stumps and moving boulders. The machine crept forward. The rope went taut. Midnight King resisted, planting his hooves, but the tractor didn't care about resistance. It pulled slow and inexorable. The stallion took one step, then another. Behind him, the chain of horses began to move. They had no choice. They were connected, each animal's fate tied literally to the animal in front and behind. If one refused to move, the whole line would tangle and fail. But they moved. Out of the dying barn, out into the white screaming chaos. Henry drove with the door open, one arm braced against the cold, the other on the steering wheel. He couldn't see more than 3 feet. He navigated by memory, by feeling the resistance on the rope, by praying the fence posts were still where they'd always been. Behind him, Holloway walked the line, moving up and down the chain. He wasn't the rich owner anymore. He was a shepherd in the old biblical sense, keeping his flock together. He shouted encouragement that the wind stole. "Keep moving, don't stop, we're almost there." His voice was raw, shredded, but he kept shouting because silence meant giving up, and giving up meant death. They were halfway home when Comet fell. He was the 6th horse in the line, a nervous gelding who'd always been skittish. They were crossing the small bridge over Miller's Creek, the narrow span barely wide enough for the tractor. The ice was treacherous black ice under new snow, invisible and lethal. Comet's back legs went out. He scrambled, panic overriding training. His hooves slipped. He fell sideways, hit the guardrail hard enough to crack wood. His weight dragged the horse in front of him down, then the horse behind. The line stopped dead. The horses in the back, unable to see what happened, unable to understand why they'd stopped moving, began to bunch up. Chaos rippled backward through the chain, kicking, squealing. The careful order dissolving into panic. Henry slammed the brakes, jumped from the cab. Holloway was already there, scrambling over the bridge railing. Comet was down one leg through the guardrail, dangling over the frozen creek 15 feet below. The rope around his neck pulled taut, strangling him. His eyes bulged, his tongue protruded. Holloway fumbled for his pocket knife, hands shaking so hard he dropped it twice. "Cut him loose. We have to cut him or he'll pull the others over." Henry grabbed his wrist, stopped him. "No, we don't cut him. If we cut him, he dies." "He's stuck, Henry. We can't lift 1,000 pounds. Henry looked at the horse, at the tractor, at the rope configuration. His mind ran calculations faster than conscious thought. Unhooked the line behind him. Holloway hesitated, then obeyed, unclipping the rest of the herd. The horses behind relaxed, no longer pulled forward by Comet's weight. Henry ran to the tractor, grabbed a spare strap from the toolbox. He ran back to the fallen horse. Comet was choking, making horrible wet sounds. Henry looped the strap around the gelding's chest under his forelegs, creating a heart-girth hitch. He ran the other end to the tractor's front loader bucket. He shouted over the wind, "Clear! Climb back in the cab! Raise the bucket!" The hydraulic whine cut through the storm. The strap went taut. Comet was being lifted, not by his neck, but by his chest, the pressure coming off his throat. Henry feathered the controls, lifting and backing simultaneously, changing the angle. With a scrape of hooves on metal and a terrified grunt that was somehow also relief, Comet was dragged backward onto the roadway. The horse scrambled to his feet, shaking, disoriented, but standing. Breathing, Henry slumped over the steering wheel, gasping. His chest felt like someone had filled it with broken glass. Each breath was agony. He was 72 years old, and this was supposed to kill him, was trying very hard to kill him. Holloway reclipped the line, his hands moving automatically. He looked up at Henry in the cab. Their eyes met. Holloway's expression said things words couldn't, said gratitude and recognition and the slow death of arrogance. He gave a thumbs up. Henry nodded. They moved on. But the storm had one more trick. The temperature dropped further, hitting 25 below. At that temperature, diesel fuel starts to gel the paraffin wax in the fuel, forming crystals that clog filters and starve engines. The tractor began to sputter, missing beats, the rhythmic clatter turning irregular. Chug, chug, clunk, chug. Henry's voice came out as a whisper, a prayer. "Don't you die on me. Not now, we can see the hill." The silhouette of his property appeared through the white, the grass-covered mound that hid his underground barn. Safety was 200 yards away. A football field. Nothing. The engine coughed. Missed 3 beats. Caught. Missed 5. The tractor was dying, fuel too thick to flow, mechanical, heart failing in the cold. 100 yards. 50. The engine gave one final lurch and seized with a metallic screech that sounded like death. The tractor died exactly 50 yards from the entrance, close enough to see the steel doors, too far to matter. Henry sat in the sudden silence, the wind rushing in to fill the void left by the engine. For 3 seconds, he wanted to stay in the cab, wanted to let the cold take him, wanted to sleep and let someone else solve this. Then he remembered Leo alone in the barn, trying to deliver a foal by himself. Remembered Bessie straining, remembered 12 horses who trusted him and 40 who needed him, and a stubborn dead wife who would never forgive him if he quit 50 yards from the finish line. He climbed down, legs numb. Holloway was there already, unhitching Midnight King from the dead tractor. His voice cut through the wind. "I've got the lead. Go check the boy." Henry didn't argue. He scrambled up the side of the earthen berm, clawing at frozen grass and snow. At the top, near the white PVC intake pipe, a figure lay slumped. Leo. He cleared the snowdrift that had been blocking the ventilation, his shovel buried blade deep in the snowbank. But the effort had drained everything. He was curled fetal snow, already burying his motionless form. Henry grabbed him by the collar, dragged him toward the tunnel entrance. They slid down the embankment together, a tangle of limbs and ice. Below, Holloway was doing the impossible. He was pulling Midnight King toward the open steel doors by sheer force of will, the stallion smelling warmth and surging forward. The string of 39 freezing animals followed, dragged forward by herd instinct and desperation. They poured into the tunnel like water finding a drain. Henry dragged Leo across the threshold just as the last horse, a shivering paint with ice coating her flanks, scrambled inside. Holloway's voice screamed from somewhere in the mass of horseflesh. "Close it! Close it now!" Henry threw his weight against the steel door one last time. It was harder now, the hinges caked with ice, the wind blowing directly against him. He pushed until black spots danced in his vision. Pushed until he felt something pop in his shoulder tendon or muscle tearing. Pushed until he couldn't push anymore, and then pushed harder because 52 horses were depending on it. The latch fell with a click that meant sealed. Henry spun the wheel, his hands cramping the metal, burning cold through gloves. 1 rotation, 2, 3. The gaskets compressed, the seal engaged, the roar instantly muffled to a dull, distant hum. Henry collapsed against the door, sliding down to the dirt floor. He checked Leo's pulse. Weak, but there. The boy groaned, eyelids fluttering. "Did the air come back?" Henry's voice cracked, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "Yeah, son, the air is fine." He looked up. Holloway was making his way through the sea of horses, checking legs, checking eyes. The millionaire looked destroyed. His expensive clothes ruined his arrogance, gone replaced by something humbler and more honest. He stopped at the stall where Bessie lay. Henry pushed himself up, limped over, expecting the worst. But there, nestled in deep straw, dry and sleeping against Bessie's warm belly, was a foal, a filly, chestnut with a white blaze on her face shaped like a lightning bolt. Holloway's whisper held wonder. She made it. I don't believe it. Henry looked at the thermometer. The mercury was climbing fast. 52 bodies generating 1,500 BTUs per hour each. The underground barn was heating up. 60 degrees, 62. He managed a tired smile. We have to open the high vents, or it's going to get too hot in here. Holloway laughed, a sound caught between hysteria and relief. Too hot. It's 40 below outside and we have to cool the room down. He looked at Henry, really looked at him, seeing him maybe for the first time. You crazy old bastard. You genius, crazy old bastard. Henry didn't reply. He just reached out, stroked the neck of Midnight King, standing next to his old gelding, Rusty. The $1 million champion and the plow horse sharing the same air, equal in their need for warmth, for safety, for the basic dignity of survival. Henry closed his eyes. He could feel the vibration of the storm raging 3 feet above their heads, impotent, now locked out. The wind screamed but couldn't touch them. The cold killed but couldn't reach them. Let it blow, he thought. Let it blow. The blizzard lasted 3 days. When the plows finally broke through to Iron Ridge on the 4th morning, the devastation was absolute. Power lines were snapped like twigs. Roofs had collapsed from Billings to Missoula. Interstate 90 would be closed for 2 weeks. The blizzard of '96 had killed 43 people across Montana, hundreds of thousands of livestock frozen in fields and poorly insulated barns. Sheriff Tom Bradley arrived in a massive snowcat, climbing out to find Henry Merrow standing in brilliant sunlight beside his grass-covered barn. Behind him, 52 horses emerged, blinking into the painfully bright world, their breath creating clouds of steam in the -10-degree air. Henry, Bradley's voice cracked. We thought you were dead. Henry squinted against the glare. Not dead, Tom, just busy. The sheriff counted horses, his lips moving as the numbers climbed past impossible. That's more than 12. 52 total. 40 are Holloway's. His barn didn't make it. Bradley turned south. Even from 3 miles away, the destruction was obvious. Holloway's $3 million facility was crushed flat, twisted aluminum and broken dreams. If those horses had been in there, they'd all be dead, every single one. Holloway emerged from the barn leading Midnight King. The sheriff took in the ruined, expensive clothes, the haunted eyes, the way he treated each horse like a miracle. Brock, your place is gone. I'm sorry. Holloway didn't look up from checking the stallion's legs. The barn's insured. I can rebuild. But if Henry hadn't... His voice broke. He couldn't finish. Bradley looked at Henry with new eyes. You saved them. All of them. Henry shook his head. We saved them. Brock helped move them. Leo delivered Bessie's foal. We all did what needed doing. Don't be modest. You built this. Everyone laughed, and you were right. The words should have felt sweet, but Henry just felt tired, too aware of the radio reports of people dying, of how close they'd come to joining them. Over the next week, the full story emerged. 3 other ranchers contacted Mitch Kowalski, asking him to dig similar structures. By summer, 4 more earth-sheltered barns dotted the hills. The town stopped laughing. People who'd avoided Henry's corner booth now sought him out, asking questions about soil temperatures and passive ventilation. Holloway rebuilt, but he didn't build up. The new barn sat half-buried, its roof covered with soil and grass. The walls were concrete. The heating had triple redundancy. But the primary temperature regulation came from the earth itself, from the constant 55 degrees that existed 6 feet down. He and Henry remained friends until Henry died 10 years later. Not competitive friendship, but the deeper bond of men who'd faced death together and came out changed. Holloway never fully recovered his arrogance. The storm had sanded it away, exposing humbler grain beneath. Leo went back to college, finished his degree, then enrolled in veterinary school. 4 years later, he opened a practice in Iron Ridge, specializing in equine emergency medicine. He kept a photo in his office, a chestnut filly, with a lightning bolt blaze taken when she was hours old. The brass plate read, "First patient, survived despite my best efforts." The filly named Storm became a legend. Holloway kept her refused all offers. She lived in a pasture visible from the road, a living reminder of the night she was born, while the world ended overhead. Henry Merrow died in his sleep on a January morning in 2006, 10 years, almost to the day after the blizzard. He was 82. Carolyn found him peaceful in his bed, one hand resting on the quilt Martha had made from their old ranch shirts. The funeral filled Iron Ridge Community Church beyond capacity. Ranchers stood outside in the cold, listening through speakers. Holloway gave the eulogy, his voice steady, until he reached the part about Henry teaching him that money can't buy wisdom, that the best insurance is knowledge passed down through generations who learned to survive by paying attention. They buried him on a hill overlooking his property. From the grave, you could see the grass-covered mound, the white PVC pipes standing like sentries. Below ground, Rusty and three others from Henry's original 12 lived out their retirement, cared for by Caroline, who'd moved back from Seattle. At the reception, Holloway raised his glass. To Henry Merrow, who was right when we were wrong, who saved lives by refusing to be modern, who proved that the best technology is often the oldest technology. The glasses clinked. The whiskey burned. Outside, the Montana wind howled, finding no weakness in the structures built by those who'd learned to respect what winter could do. The underground barn still works exactly as designed. Temperature holds steady. The passive ventilation still functions without electricity or fans, just physics and patience. New owners maintain it with reverence, understanding they're caring for something that earned its place in history. On the boulder near the entrance, a plaque reads, "Here stands the barn that saved Iron Ridge, built by Henry Merrow, 1996. When the storm of the century came, only one shelter stood. Not the most expensive, not the most modern, just the one built by a man who remembered what his grandfather taught him about respecting winter." The story became legend, the kind Montana ranchers tell grandchildren to teach them about preparation and humility. Some details got exaggerated, the number of horses, the temperature, the duration. But the core remained true. One stubborn old man dug a hole while everyone laughed. When the storm came, that hole became an ark. 52 lives saved by dirt and physics and accumulated wisdom. The fancy barns with their climate control failed. The simple hole succeeded. Technology lost to knowledge. Modernity lost to memory. Henry never claimed to be a hero. He'd insist he'd just built a barn using common sense and old principles. Nothing special. Just a man who listened to his grandfather and remembered what winter could do to those who forgot to be humble. But Iron Ridge knew better. Heroism often looks like stubbornness. Wisdom often sounds like crazy talk. The person everyone mocks might be the only one who survives when reality arrives with wind and ice. In the end, love built that barn. Love for Martha, who loved the horses. Love for the animals themselves. Love for a way of life that demanded you protect what you valued before the storm came, not after. Love that looked like madness until it saved 52 lives and proved that sometimes the craziest thing you can do is care more about being right than about being liked. On cold winter nights, when the Montana wind howls and snow piles against Iron Ridge, people drive past the old Merrow property to see the barn. The grass-covered mound looks peaceful like any other hill. Only the steel doors and white PVC pipes reveal what's hidden beneath a sanctuary built by a man who understood that when nature speaks, you either listen or you learn the hard way. Henry Merrow chose to listen. The horses lived because of it, and the town learned that sometimes the person everyone calls crazy is just the first one to hear the storm coming.